Welcome everybody. All our new panelists are here. I'd like to start by, well, saying what a great crowd we have here. First, I'm a faculty member in the Department of Planning and Public Policy Management, where we have a nonprofit minor in nonprofit administration at the undergraduate level, and at the graduate level, a graduate certificate in nonprofit management. So if you're interested, you can talk to me or anybody else in the 3 p.m. department at any time. That's my way of killing time while people filter into the room. Our distinguished panelists here are Tom Evans from Downtown Languages, Laura Miller from Mercy Corps, Maggie Keenan from ELAW, Gary Gamer from Holt International, and Cerise Roth-Vinson from Mobility International, USA. So welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I know you've received the questions ahead of time. I have received them as well. And we're very strict about timing and make sure that you keep to the topic, go straight to the next topic, keep to the one at hand, and so that way we can actually cover everybody and all the topics. The last one is really the most compelling. What 2 to 3 pieces of advice, blah, blah, blah. Not to give it all away, but that comes at the end. So we want to make sure we really run through these early ones in rapid order. So without further ado, I will go ahead and ask the questions. First question is, please introduce yourself, the organization you're representing, your current role, and your career path. Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Evans. I am the Executive Director for Downtown Languages, which is a small local nonprofit organization that really specializes in teaching people from all walks of life, but primarily focusing on low-income people with emerging language skills, primarily immigrants into our community. And we offer a variety of classes like English as a second language and U.S. citizenship, skills-based things that help them to integrate into our community and feel welcomed. And how my career path, and we're on time limit, that's an interesting one. How did I end up as if somebody had asked me 5 years ago, or told me 5 years ago I'd be executive director for a group that helps people who helps new immigrants into the United States in Eugene, Oregon, I would have asked, first of all, where? And secondly, what drugs are you on? Because for 20 years prior to this, I was an archaeologist. I was previously head of geomatics at Oxford Archaeology, which is the world's largest independent archaeological research organization. So, career path. It's more of a career trail or meander, you might say. I did my undergraduate degree in the United States. I then went immediately on to get a master's from the University of Cambridge in England, where I left in disgust of academia and then went into the field for about 7 years, where I dug holes in a line across New York State from the west side of the state to the east side of the state every 15 meters. Which means that I've excavated and filled in a cubic kilometer of earth with nothing in it, in addition to the 150 some odd sites we also found. And then after doing that for a while, that numbed my brain well enough that I decided to go back to graduate school, and I got a master's in underwater archaeology. And from there, I was hired by a friend of mine to run a small archaeological unit. And I did that for 3 years and then decided to go back and do my doctorate at the University of Oxford in Iron Age archaeology. And while there, I met a variety of people. I became somewhat skilled in statistics and some odd bits and pieces, archaeological computing. And a friend of mine, one of the professors who had been my supervisor, hired me to set up a research wing in his small organization he was starting, teaching people, developing new technologies for use in archaeology and teaching people how to use them. And that was one of the worst jobs I ever had. An awful lot of it meant standing around at booths and selling things and going to conferences and talking. But that meant that pretty soon everybody knew who I was, not least of which because I became known as that American who wears a three-piece suit all the time, which is why I decided to wear the three-piece suit. It helped me stand out in the conferences, especially archaeologists who are lucky if they wear clothes, not to mention a three-piece suit. But that led to what was perhaps one of the best jobs I ever had, because I was headhunted by Oxford Archaeology to head up their geomatics department. And geomatics is a great job to have because nobody knows what it is and you can do whatever you want. It's mapping, by the way, mapping, spatial analysis, that sort of thing. But I was put in charge of a small set, about 3 people, who was a survey department, and fetched with making this into a profit-making portion of the organization, doing cutting-edge research and a lot of all these things that were basically incongruous. But through the work of that team of people who were fantastic and some really good support by senior management, I actually managed to develop into a 21-person research team that actually got a bit of a reputation known. And I became really well known as that American who does things that we don't understand in a three-piece suit at conferences. So how did I get from there to here? Well, I ask myself all the time, and the biggest step of that was the fact I married a woman who has a degree in, a PhD in biosciences as well as an MD. And funny enough, she earns a lot more than an archaeologist ever would. And she was headhunted to take a position at MIUSA, which is a spin out of this university. Very, very exciting group. And so I went into consultancy for a while. Well, I worked with nonprofits, which was rewarding, and profit companies, which was not. But as a whole, I wasn't being fulfilled by this job. I mean, it paid well. Consultancy in those days paid really well, not so much as of September, but so I actually looked around to see what else I could do, and I wanted to do something more worthwhile. And that is when I came across Downtown Languages and what it did. And I fell in love with the organization, and they brought me in because I had such a diverse background. A lot of it because of my management background, a lot of it because I was good at fundraising, and a lot of it because I had worked all over the world. And that's something I left out and I'm trying to cut short. But I have worked in Ireland, Mexico, Germany, France, Azerbaijan, Britain, the US, Canada, and then it starts getting fuzzy because when do you call it work and when do you call it play? But I actually lived in Paris for 1.5 years. I was therefore used to living in a country that didn't speak the language, and so I had incredible sympathy and respect for our students. And so long and the short of it, that was my meandering career path, and I guess that's it. Yep.
Hello everyone, my name is Laura Miller. I work for Mercy Corps. I'm a program officer on the West and Central Africa desk. Mercy Corps is a non-governmental organization based in Portland, Oregon. We also have a headquarters in Edinburgh, Scotland, and a few other offices in the US. And we do humanitarian and international development work in about 35 countries around the world. So I support 4 of those countries in my position. I graduated from the U of O in 2000. I studied international studies and Spanish. And after graduation, I actually volunteered at Mercy Corps for about 6 months. I was going into Peace Corps, but my assignment wasn't leaving until January, and so I had June to January. Needed something to fill that time, so got a volunteer position at Mercy Corps, not knowing that I would go back. But it did definitely give me some familiarity with the organization and got to know some people there. So then I went to Peace Corps, was in Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa for 2 years. Came back to the States. I went to graduate school and got a master's degree in international development and social change from Clark University. And then had a fellowship with another international NGO, Catholic Relief Services in the Congo. Mm-hmm. So I was there for a couple of years, and then this position opened up at Mercy Corps. So I've been in my current role about 2 years now. So more or less have always been interested in international development.
Hi, my name is Maggie Keenan, and I'm the Communications Director at the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide. It's an international nonprofit organization. It's based right here in Eugene. We work with about 300 grassroots attorneys in about 70 countries around the world. We have lawyers and scientists on staff that provide our partners with legal and scientific information. This levels the playing field because the folks we're working with around the world are representing villages and communities that are up against powerful forces. You know, the government or the corporations are cutting down forests or polluting and mining, and the local peoples aren't seeing any benefits. So they're working with our partners to try and seek justice. And there's many, many different versions of that. We also have a electronic network that connects these 300 odd folks all around the world, and they share these resources between each other, because if there's a cement plant in the Philippines that's causing problems for people, the emissions coming out of the smokestack in the Philippines are the same as a cement plant in Sri Lanka or in Mexico City. And so we don't need to recreate the science. There's a lot of science behind environmental issues, and a lot of science plays a big role in court cases. So that's my current role. I've been working here for 10 years. In my last year of college, I was an English major, and getting nervous. Recruiters are coming to campus, you know, what do I want to do? And my father said to me that I shouldn't make a decision. I should just do whatever I could for as long as it took to raise enough money for a one-way plane ticket to Europe, he said, and then find a way, and enough money for that 2-month Eurail pass, you can move all around, and then find a way to live over there for a year, meaning find some work over there somehow doing anything. And I'm the oldest of 6 children, and I did what my father said. I got some work for about 8 months, 9 months. I made enough money for a one-way ticket to London and a 2-month Eurail pass, and I lived in Paris for a year and a half. I waited tables at an Irish restaurant, and I cleaned houses and had all kinds of adventures, including I went to India and visited a friend who I'd gone to college with. My trip to India is what convinced me that what I really wanted to do was join the Peace Corps. I really wanted to work in a country like India to provide a hand and really speak the language and immerse myself in a foreign culture and have that experience and give what I can. And it took a couple of years, but I joined the Peace Corps. I went to the Philippines. I liked it so much I stayed for 3 years. Right from there I went into graduate school. I hadn't thought about grad school before, but after the Peace Corps it seemed like a nice segue. I went to Cornell. I got a master's in international agriculture and rural development. I then moved with my family to Uganda, East Africa. I worked there for 4 years. I was a consultant with USAID projects, maternal health projects, put out a newspaper for the Uganda Wildlife Society, HIV/AIDS work. Moved back to Eugene. My daughter was then 5 years old, entering the school system here, and I got a job at the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide. So that's where I've been for 10 years, but I do continue to get overseas and work. I was in Kenya, you know, just a few months ago. And every day I work internationally, and I like being based here right now. I want my daughter to, you know, continue on through the school system here, and that's my career path.
Thanks, Maggie. Well, Maggie's father said, go and do whatever you want to do. My dad said, and study whatever you want to study. My dad, who graduated from Oregon State University, said, you're going to go to the University of Oregon, you're going to study business administration if you want me to contribute to your college education. So I followed suit. But I'm Gary Gamer, and I'm the Chief Operating Officer for Holt International Children's Services, which is one of a couple of international NGOs headquartered here in the state of Oregon. And our mission is to provide programs and services so that kids can be in permanent loving families. And we're best known for being a pioneer with inter-country adoption, kids from other countries coming to adopted parents in the United States. But we also are pioneers in international permanency services as well, helping to strengthen families so that children aren't in orphanages, and work with children impacted by HIV/AIDS. Matter of fact, in Uganda is our largest program, and promote domestic adoption programs in the countries where we operate, and develop crisis counseling services for women who are in crisis, and the full range and continuum of services. So my job at this agency is to provide leadership in the operational aspects and the programs and services in the 15 countries around the world that we work in. We've partnered with Mercy Corps on a number of different occasions, and they introduced us to our current work in North Korea as well, so that's a great organization. My career path, I grew up as a younger child in 4 or 5 different countries because my father's a geologist working for USAID. So international work was in my blood. And when I came to the University of Oregon, I knew that the skills that I learned through a business degree would be applicable, in working in the not-for-profit sector. And I don't think at the time there was a specialization in not-for-profit services back in the late 70s. And from that point, then my first job was actually in the business sector up in Portland, where I was an operations agent for a steamship company, actually, that brought in ships to the Columbia River ports. And so I was fortunate to work with companies from Korea and Russia and China and Scandinavia. And then I went to graduate school after spending some time with a friend who was in the Peace Corps in Ecuador, and studied at Columbia University in the School of International Affairs there, knowing that I wanted to have a career internationally. I was involved in a number of different volunteer endeavors, Operations Crossroad Africa, and American Friends Service Committee, working on Southern African and Pacific Island and human rights issues, and eventually landed a job in New York City, where there's a plethora of headquarters of international agencies, and I work for the National Council of Churches of the United States in their humanitarian assistance and human rights and peace promoting arm called Church World Service. So I worked for this organization for 7 years. 2 of those years I was in the Philippines. And after that, I being an Oregonian, you always come back here. And so the next job I got was based in Portland as the director of a refugee and immigration full-service agency working in Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. We settled a lot of refugees and were able to achieve a lot of successful asylum cases in the court system here for Haitians and Guatemalans and others, and assist immigrants as well in ESL services. Did that for, 6 years, something like that, and then moved down to Eugene for working for Holt International, and so that's my career path.
Well, let's see. Hi everyone, I'm Cerise Roth-Vinson, and I work at Mobility International. We are a nonprofit organization, NGO, that based in the downtown area, and we've been around 30 years. And the type of work we do, I'll probably talk about more with some of our other questions, but we are a disability rights organization. So one of our focus is on serving a group of people who are often marginalized and unresponded to within the international development community. And we've worked with many of the organizations represented here on the panel today who are doing amazing work. But in some ways you can think of it as kind of a diversity angle of international work. And I know a lot of people go into this field thinking, I really want to work with refugees, or I really want to work with women's issues, or whatever. And so I think this is in some ways a similar angle. Both of my parents were people who knew exactly what they wanted to do from day one, which was a complete curse for anybody who's in college. My mom is a psychologist and took that path, and my dad is a biology professor, and he took that path, and 35 years later they're still doing the same job that they've been doing. So for me it was not as easy, and I think a lot of people who have an interest in international issues find that very complex and find that diverse. You come to this because of the interdisciplinary nature of it, and so for me that was very true. My undergraduate was in international political science, comparative politics, and then I moved to Oregon for graduate school and got my master's in 1998 in international studies. So, you know, my path, I started very young. I think I was 22 or 3 whenever I started my master's program. I took a year off in between, and then started a master's program. For me, that was a very life-changing experience, and I knew that I would need that graduate degree in order to do some of the work that I wanted to do. I just didn't know how I would ever use it. And so that's what we'll be talking about today, is kind of how that path comes about. But I mean, like many people who have done international work, I was in the Peace Corps in the Gambia, which is in West Africa, surrounded by Senegal. My specialty was the Middle East, and so I've lived overseas in several Middle Eastern countries, in Turkey and in Yemen. And you know, now professionally, I have an opportunity to travel and take groups of people to different countries. So that's the work that I always envisioned that I would be doing. I just didn't know how it would come about. And so I get opportunities to go to Japan or to Bahrain, or, you know, all of these different places. And so it's an exciting field, and I can remember sitting in your shoes not that many years ago, trying to think about where my path would go. And for me, it did start with education. It started with internships that gave me practical experience and helped me refine what I wanted to do and think about what I had to offer. And then it had to do with practical experience overseas, which I think we can't say enough about, and which many of the people here on the panel talked about. You know, it adds up. 2 years here, 1 year there. Even just, you know, a month or 2 in summer experiences all contribute to you gaining language skills and you gaining that practical experience that you then bring to an organization. So you never know where, you know, archaeology, anthropology, political science will lead you down a path toward an international career.
Okay, thank you. Now, our second question was actually something that was covered by everybody. It asked about your college preparation. So we see a variety of majors at both the undergraduate and graduate level for all of you. So going to the third one, how, and limit your, you're very tight on this one, limit your answer to just how have you developed your own cross-cultural skills that allow you to be successful in your work? We have a later question that talks about the culture of your organization. That would be something different, but your own cross-cultural skills beyond just, you know, I lived overseas, but if you could give us an anecdote or something that you've learned, that would be also really great. Tom?
Well, I lived overseas. Actually, the one thing I would say about living overseas, it's not an anecdote, but it's specific, and it has to do with anybody who does a year, a term abroad, or lives there, as any number of us have. Don't just hang out with the other Americans. I think that was one of the most important. I saw that. I used to host an exchange program. I was the warden of Beaver College, which led to a lot of jokes, but I saw that the American students on the exchange program would stick amongst the American students, and they go home feeling alienated and that they didn't like whatever country I happened to be in at the time. And I was always amazed, and I tried to get them to go out, hang out with the people of the country that you're in. If it's England, hang out with the English. If it's France, hang out with the French. If it's Senegal, hang out with the Senegalese. And or hang out with other expatriates from different countries. You will find that expatriates living abroad are some of the most welcoming people around. Actually, most people abroad are welcoming, and I've never had any problem being adopted by circles of friends from around the world. But it's easy to get into an expat community because everybody's feeling alienated. So hang out with them. But I would really, even more than that, go and hang out with the people who are actually of the country you're staying in. And that has got to be the best way to develop your cross-cultural skills, because you're dealing with different cultures.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. I think in addition to that, some of the things I think that have helped me develop cross-cultural skills, one is living overseas, but then also beyond that, just observing what's going on. I think naturally I'm an observer, and so, you know, learning how people react and kind of what customs are and who's able to speak when, those type of things. What else? I think it's good to have a sense of humor because sometimes you get in situations and that's just the best way to deal with things is, not be, you don't have to take yourself so seriously. So I think in my case, that's helped me a lot. And also just being patient. I mean, I think I'm a patient person to begin with, and you need patience in this line of work.
Yep, as you go along, people are ticking off the things you've already thought of.
And then leave us here at the end with like nothing. No. It's going quite well.
Curiosity, I would say, is just so critical, just for this whole line of work. Just, if you're a naturally curious person, there's nothing more exciting than working internationally because there's things that are constantly appearing to you that are new and different, and suddenly you see something you've never seen before. So if you're naturally curious, that just helps develop those cross-cultural skills. Or is curiosity the skill itself? I don't know. And then she says patience. I mean, utmost patience. But I did want to make one comment. Even if you've been working internationally for a long, long time, you can always refine your cross-cultural skills, because even if I'm drafting something I'm sending to somebody in Papua New Guinea, and they speak English there, but still there's certain ways that we write. I always pass it by, a woman I work with from Peru or something, just to try to make sure I'm not saying something that's using an aphorism or something like that. Anyway, I'm always surprised that I find myself, needing to redirect, that you can always learn how to be even more cross-culturally sensitive or aware or whatever. It doesn't stop.
Ditto to everything that's been said, and maybe just add two things, and it might exhaust what you have to say. Forgive me. One, you can do a lot of reading on this subject, and some of the reading's crap, but some of it's very good. And the more knowledge base you have, the better. And you can try it out and see if it works. The other thing is find a mentor or two. I know mentors have been very, very important in my life, and you got to seek them out and gain their trust, and they can open up to you. And for example, one of my mentors taught me, like, when you're in China, of course you have to sit around the banquet table and you got to toast and drink copious quantities of Mau Tai. Well, go up to the waiter and you can have a few Mau Tais, but you can't get as inebriated as the Chinese do and still get worked. At least I couldn't. So talk them into pouring you water after a while without the other folks knowing, so you can be on top of your game.
See, I just learned something new. See, next time I know. Cross-cultural skills. It's funny because just recently we have been interviewing for some entry-level positions at our organization, and one of the questions that we ask people, how did you develop your cross-cultural skills, and what would you consider your skills? But one of the questions that we ask them is, okay, you pick up the phone, you're in our office one day, and the person on the other end of the line, you can't understand what they're saying. And usually, the last couple of days, the candidate has said, well, the reason you probably can't understand them is why they speak another language. And I'm like, that could be one reason. What are some other reasons you might understand them? Well, maybe they have a really strong accent, right? They could have a strong accent. Well, in our work, we work with people with disabilities, and there could be reasons that maybe the person has cerebral palsy and their speech is difficult to understand, or if they've had a stroke, their speech might be different. And then on top of that, an accent and so forth. And I think that for me, it's been a real lesson to learn about what the complexities of cross-cultural communication are. And, when we work with, just this summer, we had a woman from Zambia who was just a delight. You just meet these charming, charming people from other countries, but she was deaf. And, learning how to work cross-culturally and how to communicate with someone who is deaf from another culture is a whole nother level of skills. Do you talk to the interpreter? Do you look at her? At what level do you gesture, even though you don't speak the same language at all? And I think it's learning what tools are in your toolbox, just like they said, expanding all of those to include as many people as possible in your outreach. And I think there's something really unique and amazing at the same time about just human-to-human interaction. The more experiences that you have, you will realize that there's a commonality, they want to learn as much about you. There's that funny moment, those little smiles when you're not exchanging any words at all. And I think it's letting go of being a shy person, letting go that you don't speak the language, letting go that you might be offensive, so that you can build a bridge of commonality rather than, am I doing everything exactly right? Those are the things that build those lifelong memories and friendships with people in other countries. So yeah, but I think of all of the dimensions that you can possibly think of.
Okay, I am going to start with you, Cerise, again, because you gave me a good segue, actually. You have, our next question is about talking about the various skills and knowledge that are sought after in your particular industry that your NGO or nonprofit represents. Envision a job opening with your organization, and you have a stack of 100 to 200 applications from very eager people. What sort of applications float to the top? What do they have, and then what are you looking for? And a two-part question. I'm going to skip to part of another one. What's the hiring forecast within, say, 4 to 6 years? How about that? We'll give you a little
Gosh,
time
with this economy.
to get past this
Yeah.
recession.
Yeah.
Okay.
Skills that we look for, I can be real specific because we are in a hiring phase right now, which is crazy because of the economy, but we are. It's because at least in the NGO community, we're very grant funded, and our organization is funded primarily by the U.S. State Department and by USAID. Well, those seeds were sown, a year and a half ago when it was a different economy. Those grants have come through. I don't know what that will look like later, but right now, they all just came to fruition from our efforts of more than a year ago. So we are hiring many people like you have been. Maybe some of you have even applied for our positions. I don't know, but I'm looking for people who probably already have a degree, already have at least a bachelor's degree. We often say master is highly preferred these days, and so I think more and more my advice, I didn't used to give this advice a few years ago, is go ahead and get a master's because that does make someone rise to the top. And even with a master's, they still often start at entry-level positions. Assistant-level positions, they often advance more quickly, but that's pretty typical. Speaking another language, still I find Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, but thank goodness I already have a job. But Spanish is still a very useful skill, and that has been a make or break at times for people whom we have hired, Spanish or French perhaps. Unless, if you're worried, if the job is working within the former Soviet Union countries, okay, maybe Russian would be useful. I'm looking for somebody who is fast-paced, who can multitask, who can work with distractions and interruptions. And again, because we work in a grant-funded environment, I'm looking for somebody who has enough general skills that if that project which I hired them for is no longer funded, they could easily move to another. So I don't need somebody who is so specialized in, rural agricultural issues. That's something that we will probably consult with and hire somebody with that specific. But in a staffing position, we're looking for someone with a little bit more versatility. Ideally, they will have had experience working with an NGO or nonprofit experience so that they already know how the climate, how the climate works and who the players are and that kind of thing. And somebody who can work, you hear this all the time, but somebody who's very team-oriented so that as soon as they don't have something to do, they're willing to come over and say, I've got a few extra minutes, I'm done for the day, it looks like you're swamped, can I help you? That kind of initiative goes a long way in wanting to keep somebody at your organization. Yeah.
Forecast, as it relates to the organization I work for, there has been a phenomenal transition in the world of intercountry adoption, in which there are far fewer children eligible for intercountry adoption today than there was 5 years ago. It's dropped about in half, and so you can imagine if you're funded in part through fees that you're doing well just to maintain your overall budgets, let alone your staffing infrastructure, which we're fortunate to have been able to do. But I want to speak more generally to international work and specifically child-related work. And I think the forecast is good, and you know, Mercy Corps might be able to speak a little bit more of that. But you know, because I think now, you know, there's broad-based recognition of the importance of early services for children. You know, one of the good things the Bush administration did was allocate greater resources for children impacted by HIV/AIDS. I think the current administration is going to maintain and probably increase grant funding for that line of work. And so I think generally, if you just look beyond the immediate crisis we're in, if you're positioning yourself for those kinds of jobs and you go after them, you stand a chance of getting them if you have the kind of skills that Cerise mentioned. For our agency, and I don't think we're atypical, there's maybe 3 or 4 skill sets that come into play. The first I'd mention would be in the marketing and development realm. You don't have to be a program development specialist to get a job in an international NGO anymore, because we raise a lot of money through donors. And increasingly, you do that through information technologies and finding ways to communicate to people specifically in what their wonderful humanitarian buttons are. And so, you know, it's, that's a great skill to bring in, and that would immediately pop up, I know, to our Vice President for Marketing and Development for a job. And of course, people skills, being able to, you know, be fearless in approaching people for money and a track record in doing that, and graphic art skills and those sorts of things to make your mission kind of get through the thick skins of people. The other area would be in the actual service provision. We hire a lot of social workers, and generally you have got to have a master's in social work combined with some cross-cultural or international experience. We also, you know, we also have program developers, and I've hired a fair number of those for our agency and other agencies. And very difficult to get those jobs if you don't have experience, if you haven't lived in another country, if you don't speak the language of the region that you're working with. And you know, if you've done this for a while, you can tell when somebody's bluffing about having experience and whether they actually have bona fide experience. You got to have that bona fide experience to, you know, to kind of get through the gate, let alone get the job. And volunteerism is very definitely, you know, a good way to go if you know, if you haven't landed a job. The final sort of job sector in our agency would be general administrative skills, finances, being able to, you know, work with spreadsheets and file appropriate documents as it relates to the grants that we have, and keep track of our money and you know, our internal information systems. And you know, that's about maybe a quarter or a fifth of the kind of employees that we have.
So I just want to, I work at a really small organization. There's just 9 of us there full time, and many of the 9, at least 5, have been there for at least 10 years. So once they got in the door, they haven't left, because it's a great place to work. So we have lawyers and scientists, but there's not much turnover. But I just want to say, we hired an office manager recently, and it was really curious. We got about 100 applications for this position. And it was, I just want to throw this out there, and maybe it's not right, but it all had to be sent electronically, you know, a cover letter and your resume and answer a few questions. And we got applications from like skaterdude.whatever. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just really surprising how many young people submitted applications for a professional job from an email address that had some funky name.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a generational thing or something like that, but we got a fair number of those. So I just want to throw that out there. That's a red flag. The other one is typos. You know, you would think a cover letter on an application for a job, you would have had like 20 people read it before you submitted it, but maybe not. There's amazing typos that we'll get in a CV that's got some great qualifications and things. So that, for us, believe it or not, could just toss it. You know, even if the qualifications are there, that sort of lack of attention to detail for an important job you're trying to get. So I'm just throwing that out. That doesn't have to do with the international nonprofit sector. That's for any job. I just wanted to say that. When you're working in a nonprofit, especially a small one like ours, an attractive candidate is multi-talented, okay? They could be a lawyer or a scientist, but they also know how to write grant proposals, because nonprofits are funded by individual donors and by foundations and government grants. And fundraising is really important, or else you don't have a job. depending on the nonprofit, but you know, you're not selling something, you have a service, and so there's a lot of fundraising, so those kinds of skills are really attractive if you add it to the rest of, you know, your package. E-communications, he said the same thing. Everything is going that way, the ability to, you know, use all the different social networks and to get your message out, not just for fundraising, but to educate the world about what you're doing. We find those skills really valuable because things are changing so often, and the whole tech realm is critical. Fundraising, that a person is multi-skilled, and that can-do excited attitude. You know, the person we finally hired was just totally gung-ho excited about getting involved in this kind of work, and she had some great skills, but she had a great attitude, and you know, she had some experience knocking on doors and asking for money for a progressive cause in Texas, and I don't know, it was just a really exciting hire, and she's working out great, so.
I think there's definitely a pattern here. I should say I work in the programming department at Mercy Corps, so oftentimes, you know, I think more in terms of what we look for people that are interested in programming. But we also have a resource development department where we house the communications and marketing and publications. We have technical support units, so people that have really specific skills in health or HIV/AIDS, food security. Those people, you know, have their different track. And then we all, you know, have our finance department, human resources. So there are a lot of different departments. I'll speak specifically to the program department. When we have a candidate or a position opening, we usually get about 400 to 500 applications for one job, for an assistant program officer position. So it's very, very competitive. Typically we look for, you know, bachelor's degrees are required. Master's degrees are often highly desirable. Overseas experience is practically a must for Mercy Corps if you're looking for a program position. So most people have Peace Corps or have done volunteer experience overseas, and preferably in the region, in the same region where you're applying to. So, you know, I work in the Africa region. I did Peace Corps in Africa. Had also worked for another NGO in Africa. Language skills are highly desirable. For Mercy Corps specifically, Spanish, French, and Russian are probably the top 3. Also Arabic. And I think a willingness to, you know, people showing an initiative, people that are willing to take the reins on something and run with it. We do look oftentimes for people with strong writing skills, just because we do have so many grant applications that we do, and are constantly looking for new sources of funding. So writing is really important. And, you know, I think other things that you've already said, things like strong communication skills, being able to work in a team, those type of things. And in terms of the forecast, right now it's a tougher period, though we did, our fiscal year runs from July to June, and so we're about halfway through this year's fiscal year. And we've actually won more grants in the first half of this fiscal year than any other year. So that's looking good. We've won about $200 million in funding. And a lot of those grants are for 3 to 5 years. So that's promising, you know, that we'll still be growing. But as I mentioned, we're constantly looking for new opportunities. So I think we'll continue to grow. We're gonna, you know, right now is a bit of a tough time, but I think once the economy takes a turn for the better, we'll continue with our growth.
Boy, it really is hard being at the end, isn't it? What they said, I would say, okay, forecast first. Yes, it's a bad economy right now, and we're all struggling, and we'll all get through it. I mean, we're doing actually reasonably well, but we're desperately looking for money like everybody else. We actually have a huge number of new projects coming up, and some of the money for that disappeared because people couldn't afford it. So that leads me to skills. So yes, grant writing, again, I'll mention, and fundraising skills. I would highly recommend anybody interested would volunteer with the development office here. That, you know, coming in with that direct experience on that sort of thing will definitely give an advantage. Again, as with everybody else, languages. I would obviously, for the thing I'm presently running, I run a language organization, so having some languages would be useful. I would also like to quickly make a note versus about what the keynote speaker had said. You know, you talked about getting English as a second language. You know, you can do that anywhere, but it's not the same as it was 10 years ago. You actually need qualifications in this day and age. And so having some experience in that, we do accept volunteers. But you can't just go out and get a job in Guatemala teaching English anymore. They actually do look for people with qualifications and background. But that is a good route. It is a good professional career. That's who we hire, is people with degrees in adult education. Though there are routes through volunteering that you can work your way up there. But really, I'd like to say that, you know, while you're in university, take language courses. Even if you have a solid second language, it never hurts to have another one. And business courses, program management, project management skills. If you're looking, I can tell you things you can do to get a job, right? But that's different from building a career. If you can get knowledge in accounting and in how to do project management now, that will always succeed for you, even if you're a writer. I know my brother-in-law is an artist, professional artist, and he wishes he had accounting skills. So get them while you're at the university, get them. I'll also say that my experience with people from the 3 p.m. program has been very, very positive, and I would very seriously consider anybody coming to me with a degree from them. So.
Thank you for the plug.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to mention, you mentioned volunteering for the development office. They're very sort of prescriptive in how they work with major donors. So it's, unless you're working on their telephones as a student, it's hard to plug in sometimes.
But that still help. Sorry.
But if you take the class in fundraising,
Yeah.
which is offered at the undergrad or grad level, you have a full class. And the reason I mention that is because graduates who have gotten back to me said, yeah, I got this job. The first thing they asked about on the interview was they keyed in on the nonprofit curriculum and asked me specifically about the fundraising class.
Yeah.
So that and some other classes that you mentioned are just really useful stuff.
But even doing a phone call thing, I mean, I've gotten,
Yeah.
I volunteered at development office at Oxford, and I did phone calling, which is, telemarketing by any other name. But it gets me used to talking to people,
Right.
and gets me used opening up the conversation
Yeah.
and getting the
Sure.
guts to turn around and say, okay, so do you want to give me $50,000? Which is really hard. You wouldn't think so. I mean, maybe you would think so, but I wouldn't have. I have no shame whatsoever. But it's really hard to talk. Get into a personal relationship with somebody and then say, "Give me your money." But they know it's coming. So
We can talk about it.
yeah.
I'm going to go back to Cerise, and I'm going to start with you.
Okay.
Because we started over there twice. Could you describe the culture of your organization? We have a nice range of organizations in different fields here. So it would be good to talk about how the cultures may differ from organization to organization. It's not just all international.
Right.
Starting with you, Cerise.
Well, I think what I do like that's coming out is the breadth of skills that you need, and really an NGO operates like it is a business. Your bottom line is a little bit different. I mean, it can be a lot different, but we have a human resources division, we have a finance person, we have information technology specialist who does our server and computers, someone who does our website, all of these skills that we need, because that's not my expertise. And so I think that is important. Our culture, I think, has changed as we've gotten a little bit bigger, and it also changes with your funding sources. That has a way of shaping the way that you work. If you're federally funded, as we largely are, then that requires a higher level of compliance. It requires different procedures, perhaps. For example, if we have to have confidentiality agreements and all of this, that kind of changes the nature of communication in an office. But our organization was founded by an amazing woman, Susan Siegel, who's actually alumni of the U of O also. She, a few years ago, was awarded the MacArthur Genius Fellowship because she is such a visionary person. And you know, I think that leadership is what establishes a culture. We are I like to think of us as a very family-oriented group. There are about 20 to 25 of us who work at our organization. At the same time, we have very clear professional boundaries. I mean, we are very much about the mission. We are very much about getting the work done. We work hard and fast, and every day I look up and I can't believe it's already 4:30, 5 o'clock. And I have to make myself go home. And I think that when you are passionate about what you do within this sector, you know, we are working on critical issues of people's livelihood. We're working on poverty, we're working on HIV, we're working with children who have been orphaned because of war and crisis and environmental floods. And I mean, these are issues that can keep you up at night. So we expect that. We expect to have the best of the best working at our organization, and there's really not room for someone who's not passionate about international issues and not passionate about, you know, a cause. So within that, though, I mean, what I like about working where I work is that we are realistic, that we have a work-life balance, and that's something that dissuaded me from ever getting into the corporate world, is that I wanted a place that understood the humanity of work. And you know, I a year and a half ago became a parent and adopted a daughter from Vietnam, and you know, my life is very different now. I can't stay those extra hours. So I knew I wanted to work a place that had that balance built into it, and that is what we have. And I work with the most amazing people. Their work never gets done with just one person. We do have a culture of excellence and a culture of people who bring their own experience. And I highly respect and value that. There's no one person who can do it all.
Yeah, if you're not ready to jump in and embrace, you know, a quote unquote business model, revenue generating models for your agency, you can forget it. You won't survive in the agencies these days, you know. The distinctions now between for-profit and non-profit, you know, there are some significant distinctions. I don't want to say there aren't, but in many ways, you know, in both sectors, you have to have business models and prove that you are adding value to that. So it's not all touchy-feely good stuff in the international humanitarian world anymore, if it ever was. Holt is a faith-based organization. Actually, all the organizations I've worked through outside of the private sector have been faith-based organizations, so maybe I'll just say a word about that. You know, there are many different kinds of faith-based organizations. The ones I have chosen to work for have been those that, even though have very overt Christian identities and foundations, you know, have been very respectful of other faith groups as well. So if you're going to work for a faith-based organization, find out, you know, what it's really all about and what's expected of you. You know, there are certain legal parameters that agencies have to be operating within, but nonetheless, you know, that's a very, very important factor. The final thing I'll mention about Holt distinctly really is that, you know, we've placed more than 50,000 children in adoptive families in the United States. Some of these adoptees are now older than I am, and they are assuming leadership roles within the agency, and just as disabled peoples in MIUSA are in leadership positions and establishing the values and the cultures, their adoptees in our agency are establishing those values. And it's moved from really values of adopted parents like ourselves here to, you know, the values of the adoptees themselves and what they can bring to the table and what we can learn from them. Now, our board chair is an adoptee, and the CEO is an adoptee, and in many ways I embrace that.
Yeah, at the Environmental Law Alliance Worldwide, the culture and one of the reasons why I love working there is it's very horizontal. We're a small group, there's 9 of us, and yes, we have an executive director, an associate director, and staff attorneys, staff lawyers. But we have a very horizontal, consensus-based way that we operate, and we operate that way in our office here, and we also operate that way with the hundreds of people around the world that we work with. The help that we bring is really help that's been requested, you know. Our partners overseas know how to get the job done. They just need this tool or that law or this idea about how to address that problem, and we bring that to the table. So we have this way that we work. So even staff meetings, you know, everybody is weighing in on a lot more things maybe than other organizations might have. It might go to the committee, but we with a group of 9, it seems more possible to work that way. So that's one thing that I like. We have this kind of horizontal way we operate, and part and parcel of that is that we share a lot of the work. You know, the attorney is working on the cases and the evidence and getting the models from around the world, you know, but she'll also draft a funding proposal if it's in a part of Africa where she's worked and knows more about the issue than somebody else. So we have a way that we share bits of each other's work a little bit. So that's kind of the culture of where I work, and it's very informal. I don't dress like this to go to work, and in the summer we can wear shorts, and we don't have an office that a lot of people come by. You know, we do our work there. A lot of it's electronic, and you know, if on that rare occasion we have a big funder who's coming by, you know, we get the word and people dress up a little bit.
Same. That's the same for us.
Yeah. You know, the thing for me, I think you spend how many hours of your life working. You know, it's really important that the place you work is a place that you like. The environment, the window, the desk, the people you're with, and same thing. We have a line between professional and private, and we all know each other and like each other a lot, but we don't hang out together all the time. After work, we have our own lives and everything, but we really like each other a lot, and we all have a real passion for the work, the international angle, and also the environmental humanitarian work we're doing. We're intensely passionate about it, so we speak about it naturally. So that's the culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was actually going to say too about the passion. I think that's what we share at Mercy Corps, is that people are so excited about the work, and it's interesting, and so I think that's really what ties a lot of the people together. Mercy Corps has grown quite a bit. We've now been an organization for 30 years. We started in 1979, and we went from having just one small building. Now we're in 5 buildings, and in the process of building a new headquarters, so we'll all be in one place. When I first started, I was told, oh, we don't have organizational charts. You know, no one wanted to really put us into boxes. And I think as we've grown, we've had to do that a bit more. We've had to standardize a bit. So we didn't used to have a finance manual. And so different countries would be doing their own systems. And we finally have come together, and you know, we have tools that are shared across the organization. But I think we really resisted that for a long time because we didn't want to be just another international NGO. We kind of wanted to have our own spin on things. A couple of the things I really like at Mercy Corps is, one, just the accessibility. We're about 200 people in our Portland offices, and you know, the vice president of programs sits just down the hall, and you know, I can go see him at any time. Our CEO is also in the same building as I am. You know, we cross paths frequently. So it's really, I think, when you think of the corporate world and you may never ever see your CEO, it's a bit different in that way, where you know, we have after work gatherings and just in the office chit chat in the kitchen. You know, you see people and people are willing to talk, and so it's just a really open environment. Another thing Mercy Corps prides itself on is social innovation or social entrepreneurship. So essentially the idea is, if you have a good idea, it's worth listening to, and it's, you know, worth funding if we can find it. So I think it motivates people. We have a contest every 2 years where country programs can come up with new ideas and have a monetary reward for that. So, you know, there's a $50,000 prize, and you can actually implement your program. Another thing we do is, it's required of employees to spend 5% of their time doing organizational learning. So that means, you know, for someone like me, I could take a course online, or you know, a course at a university, and that would be part of my work week. The idea is that we'd like to keep learning, not just get out of school and apply what you've already learned, but continue in that learning process. And also, I think it's a good way to retain staff because they know that they continue to grow with the organization.
Well, I've had two very different organizations. One much larger and in many senses more international because it dealt with projects going on all over the world simultaneously. The other, Downtown Languages, which is much smaller but deals with an international population. I'll try to keep them both brief, but I think they're both very different and so worth talking about. Oxford Archaeology was very corporate in its existence. It was huge, and you need a certain structure and organization and way of doing things if you've got 250 projects going on around the globe at any given time, excluding the ones in Britain. But the one thing I will say that both the organizations share and all of this does is a dedication to the job. You're not getting rich in a nonprofit organization. You're not getting rich as an archaeologist at all. Well, you can get rich as a language teacher, but that's not the kind of language teaching we'd like to do. But Oxford Archaeology really did have to focus on the money that was coming in. We had a huge number of employees, and we had to keep them all employed, and we had to do good research, and we had to develop that research. So an awful lot of it had to do with budgets and finances and deadlines and frantic work. The average work week was 80 hours for a manager. It was 37.5 hours for a digger. But again, it was very dedicated, very hard. Archaeologists are a hard set of people. They have a hard job, but they're a lot of fun, and they drink a lot, and it's a blast. Downtown Languages is totally different, except for the fact that we also have a blast. And it's very different from all the others in that it's really very relaxed. It's really, everybody there throws in as many hours as they can for free. My average hours for my part-time job are about 60 hours a week. But they do not normally have to work that kind of hours. The teachers do not have to work that kind of hours. They don't tend to work that kind of hours. I don't demand it of anybody, but we're in a growth period. But we're changing, and my job has become much more difficult. Having said all of that, it's a very fun place. The atmosphere is very communal. We're all about the students. There's laughter, uproarious laughter at almost any given time, even and perhaps especially when things look darkest. And it's very, very fun place to work with very, very good people who are truly dedicated to what they're doing. And I think that's the one theme that we all have is you don't go into this if you don't really love what you're doing. You don't really believe in the mission. And you certainly don't do the level of work that any of us are doing if you don't believe in the mission, because I don't get to do the teaching. I don't really get to see the students. I get to do all the stuff behind the scenes that makes the rest possible. So I can't get the reinforcement of how wonderful it is working with these people who have come here after their full day of work, hard labor, paying the very few amounts of money that they have. I mean, we only charge $25, but most of these people can barely afford that, and yet are still working with a good attitude at the end of the day. It is one of the most enjoyable aspects I've ever had.
I have a final question for our panelists, that is, and actually I'm going to start with Maggie.
Good.
What 2 to 3 pieces of advice would you offer to students if they
I get to say it first.
interested in working for any global organization?
Yeah, it's just so clear to me, if somebody wants a job in an international nonprofit organization, that joining the Peace Corps is a great way to get yourself qualified. Because joining the Peace Corps gets you overseas working in a community that lots of nonprofit organizations might be serving, okay, because you'll be living somewhere that might need help someday, and you get the language skills and the training, and it's funded by the U.S. government. It's one of the U.S. government's greatest programs, and I'm a huge Peace Corps fan. I really feel like my Peace Corps service was the springboard to everything else. And I continue to keep in touch with folks who've served in the Peace Corps that I've met here, and it's a great fraternity, and you can't beat the experience of living and working in a impoverished place for a couple of years, living like the local people live, and really soaking up what that's all about, learning how most of the world lives firsthand, and not taking for granted what we're blessed with here. So for me, the Peace Corps was just, that's the greatest qualification, I think, for international nonprofit work. So why don't I just give one piece of advice, because we might use them up.
Yeah, I'm going to say the same thing, although not necessarily focused on the Peace Corps, which I think is a great organization. But there are many different voluntary endeavors you can pursue, and you know, you can check with your own national church communions if you're a part of that community, and many other different organizations. So you just have to put yourself in a position of being in other countries and having, you know, profound experiences and learnings, so that you can speak passionately about you know, the issues that concern you in the charitable world and working in other countries.
I think the panel, we've touched on a lot of these, but if you were looking at a checklist of all the things that you could possibly, you need to have like 3 out of the 5. So if you need a foreign language, and you maybe have the international experience, and you need to have the passion, and maybe a mentor, and you need to have some sort of technical training or expertise in a topic. You know, that's probably what your major is, if it's science or if it's in a language or economics or whatever it is. But you need to have some depth in at least 3 out of those 5 areas. And it might be going for a graduate degree, and it might be the Peace Corps, and it might be whatever. You can think about how to combine those so that you don't spend 2 years doing each of them, but you have to have, you do have, those are the building blocks, I think, of an international career with an NGO. The 2 things that are maybe a little more nebulous are, you know, I do love the idea of a mentor. Find somebody, it's your advisor or someone like one of us who works for an organization, and start talking about your passion and kind of getting some real world feedback on whether you're on the right path, and kind of just some suggestions. I think that is a wonderful, wonderful thing that just does not get emphasized enough when you're in college, is trying to find a mentoring relationship or a grad student or somebody who's just a few years ahead of you to give you some pathways. And, you know, think about what makes you unique. I hear a lot of times people say, you know, I just really love the Middle East, or I just really love, you know, Latin America or whatever. And I'm like, that's great, but what do you bring to it? You know, do you have a background in special education, or do you know, what is it that really does kind of resonate, that you don't have to fabricate, you don't have to draw dots together where they don't ordinarily get drawn together, that you bring something to it because of your background, whether it's that your family struggled economically, and that's kind of something that you may not be tapping into now, but later you'll realize, you know, I really do understand the issues of poverty, or I really do understand the issues of disease and, you know, not having access to health care. Whatever those things are that are part of you, that have been there, that make you unique, and therefore you're able to contribute something in a way that other people don't. That's something I would say is your food for thought. You know, your challenge is to put that together.
Yeah, I'd also say get the overseas experience if you're interested in working with an international NGO, and preferably, you know, the longer that you're able to stay, the better. I think I mentioned to a couple of you during the networking fair. I mean, 2 years does sound like a long time if you're looking at Peace Corps, but it flies by. It really does. I mean, if you think about if you've been in college for 4 years and how fast that went by. So I'd say if you're worried about the time constraint, it really does go by fast. And that will give you a lot of skills just with language and cross-cultural education and technical skills as well. Another thing would be to start building a network. So, you know, you have colleague colleagues here, you know, other students, you have your professors, just keep in touch with them, you know, and then also people like us, feel free to, you know, we do tons of informational interviews at Mercy Corps, and don't be afraid to approach people and just find out, you know, I've looked at people's CVs before, so that's fine to, you know, just start building your network and then keep in touch with those people, and you know, it's amazing what kind of opportunities that can lead to.
Well, that's fantastic. I also agree completely with talk to people. I mean, the best part of my job is actually helping people where they're not expecting anything. Yeah, I don't have to have a deadline or something like that. So yeah, do. I will emphasize, not surprisingly, languages. But I'll just emphasize that with the twist that it's not just learning how to speak to somebody, but when you actually learn a language to a certain level and use it in a real everyday experience, you begin to think in a slightly different way, and you realize more about cultural differences and how cultural differences occur and how people can think in a completely different way because you're forced to think in a different way. If you say something in French, it may not have the same meaning as the exact same thing in English, and the more you learn that element and begin to understand that, the more you'll understand the difference in the way people think and speak, and really begin to appreciate it. When you're trying to talk about something and you have to formulate something in this what seems like a convoluted manner, you learn a huge amount about human thought and what really binds us all together. So, and that is cultural knowledge that you can't duplicate out of a book. I will also emphasize the networking. Every good job I've had, except for this present one, funny enough, but every good job I've ever had has come because I've known somebody or they've known of me. And networking isn't just about going out there and meeting important people, but it's about going out and being friendly and talking to people and having a good time and letting them know you as a person, because that's what people want. The work environment is a community. Even the big corporate environment I worked in, it was a community. We were friends or enemies, but we had a relationship, and it should all be about the relationships. So those are my two bits of advice. Oh, and the last thing, develop a niche without getting pigeonholed. And it's so easy to say that, but get to be known as the person who has a certain set of skills. But what got me farthest in archaeology was I was a field archaeologist, and everybody knew I was a field archaeologist, but I also had this quirky little bit on the side that made me stand out and made me incredibly valuable because I could multitask. I had multiple abilities within the organization.
I think a common thread that I'm seeing, a trait that I'm seeing here, and I would ascribe to all of you, would be if someone were to describe them, they would say, well, this person really gets the job done. Can't you see them tackling a project, each one of them? And so developing your niche and your reputation as someone who gets the job done,
Yeah.
no matter what the situation, the country, the language. That's really, okay,
that's-
without editorializing.
That's
Thank you
really
so
good.
much.